Today is Friday, May 3rd, 2024, episode 3. This is From a Distance. Welcome to a new episode of my podcast From a Distance, where we delve into current affairs and social issues. Today we're talking about the rise of antisemitism, the protests at universities, and what I believe is the core reason behind them. Before we talk about antisemitism, we need to understand what it is. Antisemitism is a form of discrimination, hatred, or hostility directed at Jews as individuals or as a group. It can manifest in various forms, including violence, insults, stereotyping, discrimination, and exclusion. Anti-Semitism is based on prejudice and misconceptions about Jews and their religion, culture, and history. As you may know from the first episode about Israel and the Jews, listen to the episode if you didn't do it before, anti-Semitism is an old and widespread phenomenon that has existed for thousands of years. It has led to many forms of violence and oppression over the centuries, such as pogroms, persecutions, and the Holocaust during World War II. So, as just stated, anti-Semitism is based on prejudices and misconceptions about Jews and their religion, culture, and history. But who decides what is a prejudice, what is a fact, or total nonsense? I do believe that Jews are blamed too much for the actions of the Israeli government. Jews as such are part of the population in Israel, a large part, but also Christians and Arabs have the right to vote in Israel, and ultimately they got the government they wanted. On the other hand, the Jewish population must also be able to empathize with those who think differently, and that when the Jews are addressed about the violence in Israel, they know that it is not the Jews, but that it is about Israel. And wasn't the state of Israel founded especially for the Jews, to give them a safe space? If we put every word on a scale, it only leads to more polarization, which lead to even more misunderstanding and alienation from each other. But from our primal thinking, people want to organize everything in boxes. So, when we talk about the war in Israel against the Palestinians, we are talking about the box Israel, the box Palestinians, and the box war. But do the Israelis see it as a war or as self-defense? And do the Palestinians see the Hamas fighters as terrorists or as freedom fighters? It depends a lot on which side you light the fact. That is one of the reasons why I started this podcast, because I think it is important to highlight multiple sides without making any judgments. Here and there I will give my opinion, and if you think differently, I think that is beautiful. Differences make color. This is how we all grow in broadening our vision. I follow the news and current affairs closely, and my thoughts always came back to a few core reasons. Could one of the core reasons for the rising of anti-Semitism and the protests on the streets and in the universities be that the pro-Palestinian groups feel that the Jews have an exceptional position compared to other population groups? To put it bluntly, in 1947, land was taken from the Palestinians and the state of Israel was simply placed there. Is it also because for years the Palestinians have been oppressed by the Israelis with the passive support of the West? And yes, Gaza had self-government in 1994, but the 47 years before that have shaped the Gaza people with the oppression and violence of the Israeli army, with hatred and the motivation to get a truly autonomous Palestinian state of their own. And do you think it's strange that violence is fought with violence? Self-defense? Of course, I do not approve violence. But isn't it a human reaction? Could the images of settlers using violence against Palestinians, with the Israeli army standing by and not intervening, contribute to the feeling of injustice? And that the international community is also not doing anything about it and letting Israel have its way? Even stronger, the United States finances the Israeli army. If you have listened to my second episode about the Palestine and the Palestinians, then you know how important olive trees are for the Palestinians. Settlers, again passively supported by the Israeli army, set fire to or cut down olive trees. And you should know that it takes about 20 to 30 years for an olive tree to be considered mature and be able to produce a constant and high quality of olives. This form of agriculture is a very important source of income for the Palestinians and is increasingly being taken away from them. There's of course also the other side, the side of Israel and the Jews. They have experienced pogroms for centuries. They are defending their land, democratically established on November 29, 1947. Again, listen to episode 1 about Israel and the Jews to learn more about this. I don't want to stir the pot, but weren't it the French, but mainly the British, who caused this mess? The British has issued the Balfour Declaration in 1992, and together with the French, they deceived the Arab community because the two countries had already drawn the borders of the Middle East on the drawing board. After the Holocaust, the international community felt that the Jews needed a safe home. This became what we now know as Israel, but Palestine had to make way for it. And although the Arabs were initially allocated more Palestinian land than Gaza and the West Bank are now, the Arabs protested against the taking of every square mile of Palestine, which led to the War of 1948. Gaza and the West Bank became refugee camps, and the Palestinians eventually settled there under Israeli control. The attack by Hamas on October 7, 2023 was a slap in the face of Israel. 1,300 dead and around 200 to 250 hostages are a black mark in the Israeli history. The uncertainty of the families about the remaining hostages still held by Hamas, questioning if they will come home alive or if October 7 was the last day they ever saw each other. The Middle East region has barely known peace, and if I say barely, it goes back to the years before Christ. But let's get back to today, and let's discuss another possible core reason for the rising of the antisemitism and contemporary protests. Could another core reason for the protest be a form of expression of powerlessness, that the international community do not address or tackle Israel? The day after Hamas' attack on Israel, the general international mantra was that Israel has the right to defend themselves. And oh yes, I agree with the right of self-defense. But the feeling of the population was then, and I believe still is, different. Is Israel still defending itself these days, or is it flattening Gaza to the ground? Is the law of war being trampled underfoot without the international community speaking out against it? If the international governments had publicly and unequivocally condemned the war crimes committed by Israel, would students and other sympathizers still have felt the need to take the streets? In my opinion, the general population has lost connection with politics in their country for a long time. And politics has lost touch with the population, also regarding the population's feeling on this subject. However, isn't the violence, discrimination, and insults experienced by the Jews wrongly addressed? They, the Jews, individually and as a group all over the world, did not choose for this war. So let's not bother them. Don't polarize further with slogans like "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Freedom of expression is a strong right, but does it also come with duties and responsibilities? I will do an episode about this, but expressing your opinion does not mean you have to provoke. A final thought to conclude. Are the pro-Palestinian protests an expression of hatred against Jews? Or are they raising their voices out of sympathy for the Palestinians? Think about that when you form an opinion on this issue or when you go to protest. Food for thought. You have something to think about. But what do you think? Share it with me. The most important thing is that we keep talking to each other and remain open to each other's viewpoints. We don't have to agree with each other, but showing respect for each other is already worth a lot. Did you find this an interesting episode? If so, subscribe via your favorite podcast app and on my YouTube channel. Also, like and share this podcast with your family, friends, and colleagues to introduce them to this important source of information as well. Thanks again for listening and see you in the next episode.